welcome to everyone. Sorry to interrupt your lunch a little early. Welcome to Bloomington Rotary Club and today's weekly celebration of service. I'm here replacing or substituting for Lauren Snyder. He will be back. I'll untape him and let him out of the closet. I'm Aaron Davis. I'd like to thank today's greeter, Jim Sims, and our roundabout reporter, Bob Zaltzberg. No applause? Okay, so I'm now going to call Aaron Davis. Oh yeah, that's me. For the pledge and reflection. So, for my reflection after the pledge, and it's close enough to, okay, I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Please be seated. You know, as the president-elect, it's really reassuring that I have 110 coaches in the class. So thank you. For my reflection, I'm going to mostly just read the district governor's message for this month, February. Sue Wright, our district governor. And this is it. I really recommend the district newsletter. There's a lot of really good information and inspiration. And we all need both. So according to Sue, here we go. February is Peace and Conflict Prevention and Resolution Month. Rotary is dedicated to 6 areas of focus: to build international relationships, improve lives, and create a better world to support our peace efforts. This month, our focus will be on promoting peace. Rotary encourages conversations and fosters understanding within and across cultures. Our goal should be to make our communities places where we respect each other so we can live together in peace. Let's not forget Rotary's international mission. We provide service to others, promote integrity, and advance world understanding, goodwill, and peace through our fellowship of business, professional, and community leaders. Again, according to Sue Wright and me, as our country continues to struggle with diversity and inclusion, I hope all Rotarians will take a moment in February to recognize the importance of Black History Month to help bridge that struggle. According to Desmond Tutu, my humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together. She continues, as part of Rotary's focus to promote peace, Rotary Peace Centers worldwide train adults and young leaders to prevent and mediate conflict and help refugees who have fled dangerous areas. Our district supports that effort by selecting a young leader to represent Rotary District 6580 as they study and work abroad. We are Rotarians ready to join other leaders to exchange ideas and take action in our communities and around the world. Let us continue our journey to leave a lasting legacy, to be the inspiration. So thank you for Sue Wright's efforts. I also want to make sure that everyone is aware of the Rotary Peace Academy. Some of you may not be. And I'll have the address in the newsletter. And the Rotary Action Group for Peace, which is very active. Both have outstanding materials. There's no lack of information if you want to learn more about Rotary and its long history of seeking peace. and what we can do here locally to create more peace in our community. Thank you. And now, Steve Moberly will introduce our club's guests today.
We have 3 guests today, and when I call your name, if you would please stand so we might welcome you officially. First is Lisa Sedaris, the guest of Byron Bangert. She's on the faculty at IU. Amber Scobie, the guest of Jean Emery. She is with the Bloomington Housing Authority. And now Chris Michael Morrison, the guest of Jim Bright. He's on the staff of the Wheeler Mission. We welcome all of you, and if you would like more information about Rotary, please say something to your host, and they'll be glad to provide that to you, and we hope you'll return and visit with us again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And now for our Rotary family. We have some good news in that Charlotte is back in Bloomington. She's at Stonecroft for rehab. A sign-up genius is being created to notify you and to make sure not everyone shows up at once at her room. So Natalie will email that out once it's available. Okay, birthdays. Kyla Cox Deckard on the 18th, Jim Cryway on the 18th, and Owen Johnson on the 22nd. There were no membership anniversaries, though. Oh, pre-program announcements. The district conference on April 27th is approaching. We have a district engagement grant that we're eligible for as a club. The conference will be in Clarksville. The applications for the grant are due March 1st. So currently, I believe there are only 2 who have stated that they're planning to go. Contact Lauren if you'd like to be there too. The district conferences are a wonderful event, a great opportunity to get a little bit beyond Bloomington and see what Rotary really is. It's a lot. It Takes a Village Resource Fair for Parents, Infants and Toddlers is going to be on May 18th at the warehouse. So mark that date and try to let other people know who might be interested. The Lunch Buddies, quarterly. This is just a reminder that they're ongoing, and check with Natalie if you don't have the name of the person that you're buddied up with. Service opportunities, Boys and Girls Club, 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. on Saturday, February 23rd at the Monroe Convention Center. Need still some volunteers, 6 to 8, to help with light cleanup after their big event, the 100 Men Who Cook. So here we go, cleaning up after 100 Men Who Cook. To help clear tablecloths, carry items to cars, help the chefs tidy up their areas, etc. So contact Jeff Baldwin if you'll be able to participate. Hoosier Hills Food Bank on February 26th, 5:30 to 7:30. Need 20 volunteers. Please contact Liz Feidel. And then the Bloomington Rotary Foundation Board is going to meet immediately after our club meeting today. And our club's board meeting is going to be this Thursday in Stateroom West. Without further ado, Susie, and happy dollars. You have something to celebrate.
I'm going to celebrate the fact that 100 years ago today, my dad and his twin sister were born, and if they were here, I would sing them happy birthday. So that's
Looking forward to seeing our Bloomington High School South grandsons play in basketball on Thursday.
of the money raised goes to Teachers Warehouse.
I have a couple of happy dollars. They will be happy if someone can use tickets for tonight's game. I'm not boasting wearing this, but I would say the Gophers have had a season no better than the Hoosiers, up and down, and so a home victory is always possible.
I know Michael's doing 100 Men Who Can Cook, and he has for several years, so thank you. Is there anyone else in the room that's doing it? See, thank you all for doing it. That's great. Yeah. What's that? You are? Good, thank you all.
I want to just congratulate myself for only eating one cookie at our incredibly successful cookie wrapping on Saturday. I can't even remember, but we were amazing in an hour what teamwork can do. So.
I'm happy today that nobody franked me and introduced me as a guest. I'm Rotary. I'm a member. I'm glad to be back, and I'm glad to be back with the family. So I'm glad to be here.
Anyone else with an event to commemorate, or a professional, personal? Okay, thank you very much. Now to introduce the program for today, Byron Bangert.
I'm pleased to introduce Lisa Zadaris as our program this afternoon. Lisa and I overlapped a little bit in graduate school in the Department of Religious Studies, although she finished well before I did. She received her PhD from Indiana University in the year 2000, and after that she taught at Pace University in New York and also at McGill University in Montreal. Then came back to IU's Religious Studies Department on the faculty, where she has taught ever since. She came back because of the strong interdisciplinary profile of the program and because of the natural beauty of IU in Bloomington. Lisa is interested in the value and ethical significance of natural processes. Her areas of research include environmental ethics and the environmental humanities and science-religion interface. She's also interested in the legacy and the ongoing relevance of environmental pioneer Rachel Carson, whose book Silent Spring in 1962 arguably marks the beginning of the environmental movement in America and beyond. She co-edited a volume of interdisciplinary essays on Carson's life and work. Her recent research has focused on the role of wonder in contemporary scientific discourse and its impact on how we conceive of and relate to nature. Her current book, Consecrating Science, Wonder, Knowledge, and the Natural World, examines how scientific rhetoric and narratives about wonder actually pit science against religion and encourage a devaluation of the natural world. She currently leads a research project with scholars from 3 other Midwestern universities to investigate religious and political perspectives on being human in the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene being the age of the human. Also, Lisa is a co-leader with 2 other members of the Religious Studies Department of a $1 million grant from the Luce Foundation for a project called Being Human. And they are launching a new center at IU called the Center for Religion and the Human. Lisa is going to speak to us on ethics in the age of the human. Please welcome Lisa Zadaris.
I'm very short, so I have to bring this down here. How's the sound? Does it sound okay?
A little louder.
A little louder? Okay. Is this one on as well?
That's Kat.
Okay. So thank you, Byron, and thank you, everybody. It's really nice to come speak to you today. I have a very short period of time to talk about a very, very big topic. So let's see if I get my technology working here. No, not that one. not able to get this off my screen. Okay, let's try again. Okay. So how many of you have heard the term Anthropocene before today? So a few of you have. All right. I am hoping I can show you a very brief introduction to what the Anthropocene is. This is a film that I have shown to my students at times, and I always ask them to sort of pay attention to the tone of this video, the way that the Anthropocene is being introduced. Can you do anything with the sound?
Mic closer to it.
I don't think that's going to do it.
But this was nothing compared with what's to come. The 1950s marked the beginning of the Great Acceleration. Globalization, marketing, tourism, and huge investments helped fuel enormous growth. People swarmed to cities, which became even more powerful engines of creativity. In a single lifetime, the well-being of millions has improved beyond measure. Health, wealth, security, longevity, never have so many had so much. Yet 1 billion are unpunished. In a single lifetime, we have grown into a phenomenal global force. We move more prevalent and more handling the automatic processes, such as erosion and rivers. We manage 3/4 of all land outside the ice sheet. Greenhouse gas levels this high and have been seen over 1 million years. Temperatures are increasing. We have made a hole in the ozone layer. We are losing biodiversity. Many of the world's deltas are sinking due to damming, mining, and other causes. Sea level is rising. Ocean acidification is a real threat. We are altering Earth's natural cycles. We have entered the Anthropocene, a new geological epoch dominated by humanity.
Okay, so the Anthropocene comes from the word anthropos, meaning human. So the idea is that we've entered a sort of age where the human has become the dominant force on the planet. And to the extent, to a level of considering the human something like a geological force that's reshaping the planet. So it means literally the age of the human. One of the things that scientists and others, including humanists, argue about is when did the Anthropocene begin? If we want to say that we're in a sort of new geological epoch that's named after the human, when did this actually begin? And I think this is a really interesting question because depending on how we answer it, it gives you a particular kind of image of what a human being is. And so some of the candidates for when the Anthropocene began, if it has begun, include things like when humans caused megafauna to go extinct back in the Pleistocene, so we're talking about 12,000 years ago, maybe the advent of agriculture, the Columbian Exchange, or quote unquote discovery of the Americas, the onset of the Industrial Revolution. Some people would actually pinpoint that specifically to the steam engine being invented. A very popular one, you couldn't probably hear it very well in the video that I tried to show you, but around 1945 or 1950 is a date when many, many scientists believe that the Anthropocene began. Some of them pinpoint that specifically to the detonation of the first atomic bomb. If you think of that as being a sort of moment when humans acquire unprecedented powers, then that seems to cast us in a kind of frightening light, right? If what it means to be human is something that can be traced to dominating power that begins with atomic weapons, then it seems like that doesn't bode very well for our ability to manage the planet as a kind of powerful force. So there are many other proposals as well, and what interests me about this debate is, depending on which of these dates you pick, it gives you a particular idea of what it means to be a human. It also, I think, can either naturalize the Anthropocene as something that's been going on for thousands of years. So if the Anthropocene began when humans sort of rose to dominance with agriculture, then it seems like a very incremental kind of change, where humans have sort of gradually come to take over the powers of nature. If it's something very sudden and dramatic and destructive, like the atomic bomb, then that shows us, that we are a dangerous species, right? That we're a kind of species that can change the planet in ways that are entirely destructive, that we have the power to do that. So one of the things that interests me as a religion scholar is the way in which these kinds of questions seem to me to kind of be religious questions. There's theological kinds of questions. They're sort of the biggest possible questions about what it means to be a human and what the future is going to look like. Here's one example of a way you might think about what the Anthropocene is to think just about the sheer amount of plastic that's in our environment. You may have read that now all of us have sort of microplastics inside of our bodies through the water that we drink and the food that we eat. So plastic is in everything. So you might think of the Anthropocene as being, one example of that being, you might call the plasticine or something like that, right? That it's just everywhere. And if you probably can't see these dates very well, but these are dates that indicate how long some of these things that we've put into the environment stick around. So they'll be around for a long, long time. And so in this sense, we're sort of changing the planet in these ways that are unprecedented, that will go on and on long after humans are gone. So some of that plastic's going to be around forever, practically. Of course, the way that most people think of what the Anthropocene is climate change. So something that is global in nature, that's human-caused, that's seemingly unprecedented, at least as something that's not a natural occurrence, right? So none of these things sound very positive in terms of humans having the power to sort of manage the planet. So for me, what interests me is the way, as I said, these questions are sort of religious-like in what they sort of ask us to think about what it means to be human. So what does the Anthropocene portend for what it means to be human? What kind of human is this that shapes the planet? Can the sort of idea of humans as a collective entity, a geological force, is there a kind of particular human that we have in mind when we think about that? For example, if you imagine that climate change is one of the main indicators of the Anthropocene, well, who's causing climate change? It's not actually everyone, right? It's mostly those of us who are in the sort of industrialized, the global north. So is that idea of the human kind of standing in for people who are not even responsible for these changes on the planet? Or if you think about the Anthropocene, the age of humans beginning with something like the Columbian Exchange, well, that's a particular type of human. That's, again, a human that doesn't stand in for every type of human who has lived on this planet. So what I find interesting is that there's a kind of almost like a theological account of what the human is that's embedded in the idea of the Anthropocene. There's a particular vision of the human. So even when scientists who speak about this in very sort of objective and empirical terms, when they talk about the Anthropocene, they have a sort of image of the human in mind. And I'm interested in thinking about what that image is and whether, in fact, it can stand in for everybody who's lived on this planet and currently lives on this planet. So another question, what's the sort of vision of the future that the Anthropocene would sort of predict? Is it a bleak future? Is it an exciting future? Do we feel optimistic about it? And I think a lot of that depends on how you answer the first question. So if you think of the human as being someone who is innovative and creative and always finds solutions to their problems, then you might look to the Anthropocene as kind of an exciting opportunity. If you think of the human as being that human who, detonated the first atomic bomb, who gains mastery over the planet by destroying it, you might be more skeptical about the future of the planet as something that humans can manage intelligently. I won't tell you where I stand on those questions, but I do think that's a religious kind of question, sort of what are we capable of in terms of good and evil? And how does the Anthropocene transform ethics? And that's mostly what I want to focus the time that I have this afternoon to talk a little bit about how the Anthropocene, in changing what it means to be human, changes the way that we interact with the natural world and our sort of ethical relationship to the natural world. So what I'm trying to say is that kind of embedded in Anthropocene conversations, even when they're sort of scientific conversations, is something that looks a lot to me like a religious conversation, that is asking these kinds of big questions about the human, and though it's sort of disguised in a secular form, it resembles a kind of religious speculation in some ways. So in naming an epoch, an entire geological epoch after ourselves, which is what the Anthropocene would propose that we do, is that an admission of guilt? Are we saying, yes, it's us, we're the ones who did it, we're the planet destroyers, and as a way of sort of making us more aware of what we're doing? Or is it kind of like a boast? Look what we can do. And I think you find both elements of that in the way that you hear people talking about the Anthropocene. Or is it something else, something more complex? So in terms of what kind of human this is, what does it pretend for humans? One person whose work I've often looked at is Stuart Brand. Some of you might recall Stuart Brand was one of the early sort of counterculture, sort of hippie turned like tech entrepreneur, right? So he produced this whole Earth catalog in the 1960s and put the picture of the Earth from space on his whole Earth catalog. He was very interested in technology, and he still is today. He's still working with people like Elon Musk, wanting to go to Mars, wanting to do all these sort of ambitious high-tech projects. So in terms of the way that Stuart Brand would answer these questions, he would say that basically we're gods, right? And we might as well get good at it. And so humans are presented in this kind of, here you see the religious idiom of we are godlike. Sometimes there's a book called The God Species. So humans are the God species. So you can see the way that religious thinking slips into this kind of scientific and technological rhetoric. So that's one way of thinking about what it means to be human. So if you think that humans are gods or godlike, then how we deal with the natural world and the kind of technology that we use and how we use it, I think will depend a lot on what your image of the human is. So I want to talk about three particular examples of sort of emerging, what I would call sort of Anthropocene technologies that I'm particularly interested in. So the first one of these is de-extinction. How many of you have even heard of de-extinction? So the idea here is that we can use, especially genetic technologies, CRISPR technologies, gene editing, if you've heard of some of these things. The Chinese scientist who was in the news, right, for manipulating the genome of, I think it was twin babies, right? We're not supposed to be doing that. There's a moratorium on that, actually, so that's one reason that he got in trouble. But that kind of technology, gene editing, what people call CRISPR technology, can actually be used, theoretically, to bring back extinct species. So species that have gone extinct, whether they're ones that humans have driven to extinction or whether they went extinct by some sort of natural causes, we can use genetic technologies using either cloning or gene editing to bring back, in some sense, extinct species. That's one example. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. Another is a way of kind of assisting the evolutionary process itself, and there are different ways that we can do this. So for example, organisms that are being threatened by climate change, we can physically move them to other places where they're more likely to survive. So think about the human as managing nature in this way, moving species around, putting them in new places so that they can survive. And then of course geoengineering, a way of engineering our planet as a response to climate change. So these are all what I would sort of consider Anthropocene technologies. They're technologies that are emerging in the so-called age of humans. So to think a little bit more about de-extinction, here you can see again that religious language sort of slips into these conversations. There's a project in Australia called the Lazarus Project. So you see how it seems like a very natural idiom, I think, for scientists to use, often to draw on religious language. So the Lazarus Project, and then there is a scientist at Harvard named George Church who's interested in reviving woolly mammoths. So you'll recognize maybe some of these animals here. We have, I think that's a dodo, right? And then there's the thylacine, which is the Tasmanian tiger. The Australians are very interested in seeing if they can bring back this extinct animal that has a very iconic status in Australia. Some of the big megafauna, so things like woolly mammoths. George Church at Harvard is working on bringing back a woolly mammoth. And then there's things like dinosaurs, which, you know, if you've seen Jurassic Park, then you know that sort of all the bad things that can happen if you bring back dinosaurs. Actually, we can't really bring back dinosaurs, probably, because we don't have their DNA in you know, intact form enough to do that. But there are some organisms for whom we have DNA, and there are others who have close living relatives. So what we can do is sort of fiddle with their genome, edit in, edit out particular genes to make them as close to a woolly mammoth as you can get. So these are some of the technologies that scientists are thinking about using to bring back extinct species. Now there's a very interesting question here, which is that what are we actually bringing back, even if we succeed in doing this? They're not, of course, the animals themselves that have gone extinct, right? Because those are gone. So if you're thinking about this in terms of justice, right, sort of doing what's right by the animals that we have driven to extinction, what people call, you know, reparative sort of justice, then in a way it doesn't quite make sense, because the ones that we would be bringing back, of course, are not the ones that we killed off. They would be some kind of lab creation that we have made. There's also a big question whether, using this technology, there's really any kind of ecological or environmental rationale. Because even if you can successfully bring back one or two, you know, individuals of these organisms, to actually bring back a whole species that could exist in an environment today is a huge ecological challenge. And so it seems to me that often what's really behind a lot of these projects is not the ecological and environmental concerns. It's not about sort of restoring nature. It's more about the thrill of creating something. The excitement of seeing a woolly mammoth again, right? And you can see this in some of the literature where scientists write about bringing these things back, how excited they are just about the prospect of like being in the presence of one of these animals, how mind-blowing that would be. And so in some ethical arguments that I've read, people actually refer to this as the coolness argument. It's cool, wouldn't it be cool? Because it would be cool. Who wouldn't want to see a woolly mammoth? So my question is whether that's a good enough kind of ecological reason to bring back some of these animals, because it would be cool. So it's hard to see the environmental or restoration rationale sometimes. You can sort of see that there's something else going on here. It's kind of about the creative power of the human. So there you have that sort of godlike aspiration, you know, to create life. With assisted migration or assisted evolution, there's some different examples of this. Here I think there might actually be some good reasons for trying to to bring back these or save them before they go extinct, or just move them around so they can live someplace in a climate that they're better adapted to. So one of these examples is a particular tree, and this is an activist who is with other people helping to move these trees to environments where they can live better as climate change sort of moves them out of their, you know, their sort of native environment. So you can imagine sort of climate change progressively warming, some of the southern states, these trees can no longer exist there. So people are kind of physically moving them further north so that they can exist. That sounds fairly harmless and maybe is even a good idea. In some cases, I think it is a good idea. But think about what it says about the human in relation to nature. We've now sort of taken on this role of managing evolution in these very hands-on ways. And in fact, some of the people who do this do it in a kind of almost like a guerrilla, subversive way. Like, scientists don't even know they're doing it. They're out there, replanting these things. So it's kind of an activist sort of engagement. Another example is, I'm sure many of you have heard about coral reefs that are suffering from, acidic and warming ocean waters. And so some scientists are looking to use genetic technologies to help these corals survive in warmer and more acidic waters. And so essentially they're sort of genetically engineering the corals so that they can do that to save them before they're all gone. I think this could be actually a legitimate use of some of these technologies. But again, it says something interesting about the relationship that humans now have vis-a-vis nature, where we're directing and managing evolution in these ways. The last example, probably the one that people are most interested in and worried about, is geoengineering the climate, the planet, in response to climate change. So one of the most popular proposals for doing this involves solar radiation management, and these are a variety of different strategies to sort of reflect some of the sunlight back out into space. Some of these can seem sort of just normal, natural kinds of things, like, just having more reflective surfaces on buildings that could sort of send some of that sunlight back. But then there are other things that are really much more kind of messing around with natural processes in our climate and our atmosphere. So cloud brightening might be one, or putting things in the atmosphere in a way that sort of mimics volcanic action. So we don't quite know what we're doing. We might cause some problems if we start to mess with some of these technologies. Or putting sort of space mirrors out there, mirrors out in space to sort of reflect some of that sunlight back into space. So these are very large scale and delicate kinds of technologies. Most scientists would agree that we don't quite know how to do these things, but it is beginning to seem more and more as climate change worsens and it looks like we're running out of time to deal with climate change, that we're going to probably at some point fall back on some of these technologies. So again, think about the human as being the kind of creature that can actually engineer an entire planet. And that's a kind of Anthropocene image of the human. From an ethical standpoint, though, what I find kind of interesting and worrisome about this is the way in which it creates what ethicists call a moral hazard. And what I mean by that is that being able to engineer the climate or the planet becomes a kind of almost like an insurance policy, right, that we can fall back on. So if we know that when things get bad, when climate change worsens, as it will, if we know that we can kind of fall back on a technology that will allow us to manipulate the planet and the atmosphere rather than cutting back on carbon emissions, is that what we will do? So rather than mitigating the amount of CO2 we put into the atmosphere, can't we just find a fix? So there's something that switches channels in a person's brain, I think, between that kind of fitting ourselves into nature as opposed to changing nature to sort of suit our needs. And so this kind of technology seems to be one of those switches between sort of mitigation of climate change and adapting the planet to ourselves. And so it's a moral hazard in the sense that just as an insurance policy might give you a sense of security so that you behave in riskier ways, this is a kind of insurance policy for humanity as a whole. If we can change geoengineering, right, if we can do that, we don't have to change ourselves. And so that's what ethicists call a moral hazard, right? And those are the kinds of questions I'm interested in. So just to sort of sum up, So I'm interested in the Anthropocene, and other people I know are interested in the Anthropocene, as something that's functioning in a kind of implicitly religious way, in terms of the narratives that we tell about humans, in terms of the kinds of powers that it gives us over nature. So these are kind of some of my current research interests. And Byron mentioned a couple of projects. One of them is a project on being human that I had a conference here at IU where we talked about the ways in which Anthropocene narratives and images of the human have a sort of religious-like function in ways that are both interesting and troubling, I think. And also a grant that two of my colleagues and I are working on called Being Human, and we'll have a new Center for Religion and the Human. And the Anthropocene is one of the things that we'll be talking about, but also just more generally the relationship between humans and technology and nature. So I just want to end with another way in which I think religions can feed into thinking about the Anthropocene, not in a negative way, but I think in a very positive way. The religions are one of our oldest reminders of the idea that humans are not God. And one of my favorite sources of that reminder is Pope Francis, whose encyclical Laudato Si, I think, makes that point very clearly. And I find him to be sort of an inspirational figure in the world that we're living in right now. So the idea that we're finite beings, that we're not gods, however much we want to think of ourselves as a god species that can manipulate the planet, religions have often said, for a long time, have said, no, that's not true. That's not who you are. So that's one of the ways that religion, I think, can push back against some of the arrogance of Anthropocene thinking, but also allow us to see, as people like me, religion scholars, to see the way in which the narratives themselves contain a kind of theological or implicitly religious orientation. So, thank you.
Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one or two questions, and then Lisa will be able to stay a little bit afterwards. Any questions? Leslie.
So I have a question that it may be related to what we're talking about. It's not exactly, I think, but let's just say that everything we know now is destroyed because some comet hits us or we blow ourselves up in a thermonuclear destruction, and the whole thing starts over again. The fact that a lot of what has fueled our technology are actually more discoveries of fire or the power of steam or all of those things, wouldn't the Earth's future as it evolves back to some state, wouldn't all of this sort of be repeated again? Because the age of people or whatever being might be there, they would soon discover that. And so we're just kind of playing out, what would have happened anyway. That's just something that is intrigued my thought pattern.
Well, I mean, so it's interesting that you said that, whether or not, if everything were wiped out, if things sort of replayed, would it play out the same way again? I'm really interested in some of the work of astrobiologists who study this question in some ways, to see if, do planets, even though we don't know of other planets right now that have, life, intelligent life on them, would they play out in the same way? Do all planets and the life that lives on those planets eventually get to a point where their technology is sophisticated enough that they can destroy themselves? And so if we find life on other planets, you may have heard Carl Sagan used to talk about things like this, right? They would likely have, if they're still around, they will have passed through this kind of technological stage where they had the ability to, blow themselves up, but somehow they managed not to do it, and that then they will be a sort of a more advanced civilization, than we are, morally speaking. So it may be that this is a kind of inevitable. I mean, I think it's dangerous to think this way about inevitability, because I think it sort of naturalizes things like the Anthropocene as just like a normal stage that a planet goes through. But there's a big debate among evolutionary biologists that's exactly sort of what you just said. If life were to begin again, say just on this planet, would it evolve in the same ways? Would it eventually produce humans? Would those humans eventually, invent the same kinds of technology that they did, you know, that we have? And is that something inevitable? And I think there's a just kind of basic disagreement among evolutionary biologists whether that's true or not, or whether life is actually much more contingent than that. But it's a fascinating question.
Thank you. Thank you. Very sobering and important for us to think about as citizens. And we'll soon recite the four-way test. And we have to think about how this all fits in there. So we're going to give our usual speaker recognition award in honor of this talk to the community kitchen, as usual. Every talk we do that. Next week, Jim Bright will introduce a very esteemed program. I'll let you read about it in the roundabout. And our greeter will be Jim Shea, Pledge and Reflection from Chris Kroll. Sarah Laughlin will introduce the guests, and the roundabout reporter again will be Bob Salzberg. Yes. And I want to share Lauren's thought for the week. The harder the conflict, the greater the triumph, from George Washington, which made Lauren think about Rotary's battle to eradicate polio and how sweet that will be when it happens. So please, let's recite the four-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, first is the truth. Second is the care of all concerned. Third, will and friendships. Fourth, will be beneficial to all concerned. Fifth, yes. Thank you.